Hi, Post Road Jen. This is Kristan Hawkins. Welcome to this new episode of Explicitly Pro-Life Podcast.
Hi, I'm Autumn Higashi, and this is my new show, Unapologetic, powered by Students for Life. It's 2022. We don't have time to be scared of being publicly pro-life because we have bigger things to focus on, like saving lives. But I know it can be hard. The moment you open your mouth, you are bombarded with pro-choice keyboard warriors attacking your every word. And it can be intimidating unless you know exactly how to defend your position. Truth fears no investigation. There's an answer to every question, a solution to every situation, and a way to care for women and children. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So, consider me your new pro-life best friend. We all know pro-abortion media is shoved in our face daily. Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, you name it. I want you to be able to understand how to break down their arguments and shine truth and light on this culture of death. I want you to not only know why you believe what you believe, but how to defend it with truth and love. Because we are the pro-life generation, and we are unapologetic.
This is going to be an amazing episode. We have a lot to talk about today, as I really want to address how do we change young women's minds about abortion. You know, those people who are directly targeted and advertised and marketed to every single day by Planned Parenthood. The reversal of Roe versus Wade obviously resulted in a flood of lies from the left. Lies that are extremely dangerous to young women in particular. Claims that women will die of ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages. We've heard claims that women will be arrested for procuring abortion, or that women will die in back alleys. We don't have time today to debunk all of these lies. And, you know, certainly I've been talking about this a lot. So make sure you subscribe and listen to all of our past episodes for the past few months. But I definitely want to talk about some of these myths. And so coming on today as a guest is my good friend Isabel Brown. She is a content creator and commentator. She inspires this whole generation, especially Gen Z, to live the American dream. She is the proud host of a daily show powered by Turning Point USA called Rent Free. I love that title. Interviewing culture's most impactful creators, musicians, actors, and public figures. She published her first best-selling book, Frontlines: Finding My Voice on American College Campus, in February 2021. And I've been to that college campus, Isabel, and it is tough. And she's currently writing her second book, which is coming soon. She is a voice for this generation, particularly Gen Z, and she regularly appears. You've probably seen her in the news. She's about Fox News, Newsmax, Sky News, BBC Radio, all of the French and German public broadcasting. She was on the cover of Newsweek. You might have also seen her on Students for Life's own channels, as she is one of our senior ambassadors here at Students for Life. She speaks for Daily Wire, Evie Magazine, PragerU, Live Action, and many more. She earned her bachelor's degree in biomedical sciences from Colorado State University. And Isabel also earned her master's degree in biomedical sciences, policy and advocacy from Georgetown University. In college, she worked for both the United States Senate and the White House under the Trump administration. And you can follow her on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, get her, all those things, the Isabel Brown. Isabel, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me back. It's been a while since I've been on this podcast, but great to see you, Kristan.
I haven't had very many repeat guests, so it's because we're a big fan of what you do, and especially all that you're doing on social media, that we wanted to have you back on today, because I really think you have this gifting to use your platform to help, and what you do all the time, and I see your reels and videos, to kind of correct the misinformation that's particularly affecting young women. And I think this is extremely valuable right now when we have so much in the media, all this information, inundating young people, especially women, that's incredibly biased, and sells them this really this lifestyle that is unlikely to actually lead to happiness and flourishing. So I don't know. I see your voice as this voice for this generation, especially as this, big sister moment. So thank you for all that you do. It's an honor to have you back on.
You're going to make me cry, but it is so true. And it's really remarkable with the topic of abortion in particular. Gen Z women are being sold this bill of goods of what's going to make them happy and fulfilled and leading a wholesome lifestyle, not just with unplanned pregnancies and having to deal with the abortion industry, but with what the abortion industry is now calling consequence-free sex, as if that exists somehow, that they need to pursue running away from a family instead of running towards it. And I think this generation is really starting to wake up at such a young age and realize they don't want what the world is trying to sell to them. And it's a really exciting time to be pro-life and vocal about it online for sure.
Is consequence-free sex actually a phrase that they're using?
Yeah, I'm hearing it all the time, which is just remarkable and crazy. And I think it really started with Planned Parenthood pushing this interesting narrative that you should have a right to consequence-free sex. And they're using that obviously within the lens of abortion, meaning you should have a right to have sex without procreation and having to deal with that. But the reality is, I'm a biomedical scientist by education. There's no such thing, pregnancy or otherwise, as consequence-free sex. Your brain releases hormones every single time you have sex with someone that helps you feel bonded to them. That's a consequence, a positive one. But it is. You feel connected to a person intimately that you are engaging in sexual behavior with. That's a consequence, a positive one, but it is one. Maybe you're exposed to STDs. That is a negative consequence, but there is quite literally no definition of sex that does not involve consequences. And I think it's really interesting that we're seeing this narrative being pushed because it's really similar to everything else we're seeing culturally for Generation Z in America right now, too, that you should be able to do what you want. You should be able to sleep with who you want. You should be able to follow whatever the government tells you or whatever with zero consequences for your actions. And there's such a missing piece of personal liability and responsibility there.
Absolutely. I mean, even when you were talking, you used the word STD. And I use, the phrase STD all the time. By the way, monkeypox isn't STD because we can't say that because that's not, adequate. It's not very friendly to our LGBTQ allies. But, whatever. If we can redefine recession, we can redefine STD. But they did that a number of years ago. They stopped calling it STDs. They started calling it STIs. And it literally drives me nuts because I will use that phrase in a speech or in Q&A after a speech on campus, and students will come and be like, it's an STI, it's not STD. And I'm like, tell me why. And some of these are incurable ailments that you have, which would be defined as a disease. Why do you think the abortion industry doesn't want to call it STD anymore? And now they changed the entire medical industry to call it STIs because infection sounds less scary, less of a bad thing than disease. And it's so fascinating to see even the conversation around monkeypox and, not labeling it STD because that's unfair to gay men, but it clearly is. And so the medical industry is like bowing to the demands and going out of their way to redefine terms, even if it harms people. So I'm so glad you do what you do and you can figure out how to make TikTok reels because for the life of me, I can't do it. I have sat and tried to make reels and 4 hours later, I get 30 seconds and I have to start all over. So I'm so glad you are up on it. Okay, I have some questions, especially about, I get some really interesting, DMs, direct messages if you're not on the line and you'll know the lingo, from young people all the time who hear pro-abortion claims, whether it's on TV or, generally in culture, on social media or friends. I kind of want to know, what are you hearing when it comes to abortion and the aftermath of the Dobbs decision, the Roe reversal? What kind of questions are you getting DM'd about the most from young people, particularly women?
Well, I think it's smart to say up front, these are questions. What I've really noticed in the past is that the pro-life community often has a view towards pro-abortion young people, especially, and pro-choice young people, especially. That's what they like to call themselves. Obviously, we know that's pro-abortion, that they are really aware of everything they believe in, that they are willfully advocating for all of these things. And I think the reality for Gen Z is that they've never been taught the actual reality of what an abortion is. Genuinely, they have absolutely no idea what an abortion procedure looks like, how devastating it is to a mom who's facing that, what that actually means, that it's ending the life of a child, and of course what that means on a macro scale for our generation. And it's so difficult for Gen Z to think about the complete mass totality of abortion in America, because 1/4 of our generation is missing today that would otherwise be here thanks to the abortion industry alone. And so I think it's just so much, and it's so overwhelming for this generation, who are about 12 years old all the way through 25. I'm the first year of Generation Z, who genuinely have no idea. I know. I wear it like a badge of honor. It's great. Millennials, they have their issues, but I think Gen Z is the greatest generation that we've seen in a long time. And I can tell you more why on this podcast. But I think they just genuinely have no idea. And so when people DM you and they ask questions, or maybe they get emotionally defensive or angry, what we've often seen in the pro-life community is you shut that off because you're like, I just don't even want to debate with these people. I don't want to give them the time of day. Genuinely, please give them the time of day, because they desperately need to know what is actually happening behind closed doors in a Planned Parenthood clinic or in abortion facilities all over the country. And I've found that once they do know that, they do rapidly change their minds on this issue more than any other generation that we've seen in modern history in the United States. So
why is that? Why? That's a great line, what you just said, that they are willing to change their minds. Because what we've seen specifically with, millennials on the campuses is, giving facts and even conveying personal convictions and stories. They'll be like, yeah, you do you, whatever, and I'm doing me, and they walk away. And you're like, but there was science. I gave you everything you needed. And I think that's very frustrating for pro-lifers of, well, how are you supposed to win these people? Because I've given them science, I give them emotion, I give them personal testimonies. I do both, head and heart, and they still don't get it. Why do you think that do you just think it's just because there's such a lack of knowledge that it's just,
No, I don't think it's a lack of knowledge. I think they have the wrong knowledge. They're largely misinformed, but they're not uninformed. And people like to look at young people in this country, especially within the political world that I work in every day, as stupid or dumb or uneducated. I mean, there's so many different labels that I hear day in and day out. And that's always blanketly applied to youth culture in America. The reality is, when we talk about youth culture right now, we're talking about two very distinct, different generations that politicians are often defining as youth, and that is millennials and Generation Z. We kind of alluded to that a second ago, but the cultural identity of millennials could not be more different from Generation Z. Millennials, I often ask at speeches or events that I'm attending what immediately comes to mind adjective wise for that generation. And I often hear blue hair, scream at the sky, entitled, participation trophy, crybaby, whatever. I know it's sad. Not everybody is like that, but it is largely the connotation that our society has with millennials. And I think we have that connotation because to some extent it is true. What immediately comes to mind for me is the construction vest girl screaming at the sky after the 2016 election. Like, no, great meme. We all love it. But Generation Z, interestingly, is following the pattern of every single generation ever in human history, in that you always rebel against those who came right before you. You rebel against the generation before you because you want your own unique cultural identity. So what's fascinating is if you remove partisan language of Republican versus Democrat or conservative versus liberal, Generation Z on an issue by issue basis is the most conservative and free thinking generation that America has seen since World War II. Which is mind blowing. Like, that is crazy. Yeah. And yet politics continues to look at Gen Z through this lens of entitled socialist brats who can't possibly think for themselves. But the reality is Gen Z is the most educated generation of all time. We have the most advanced education of anyone who came before us. We have the most access to information at one given time ever, thanks to the internet and social media. Instantly, you can discover a wealth of knowledge on any subject. And we're inherently skeptical. And I think a lot of that has to come from how we were raised. Most Gen Zers were born or were very young around the time of 9/11, when the entire world went into chaos and we constantly had shifting terms of what it meant to be at war and terrorism and what that eventually meant for our society. We grew up in the era of school shootings, which was horrifying, but inherently taught us how to be very, very skeptical of our safety and our surroundings. We grew up with Common Core, with indoctrination, with all of these things starting to happen in elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. And obviously that's trickling down all the way through preschool now, which is just crazy. And then we came into adulthood at this really uncertain time of COVID-19, where we were completely isolated from the world. Everything became a simulation from having sex with someone by watching pornography instead of doing a legitimate monogamous relationship.
That's a thing?
Oh yeah. I wish it wasn't normal, but that's so normal. And even hanging out with our family for Thanksgiving dinner was on Zoom for the last couple of years. And so you've created this generation that's been fed a facade almost of reality. And because of that, you're starting to see them want to break the mold of how culture works. They're breaking out of the two-party system. They're breaking out of the lie that you need higher education to succeed. We're not going to college at the same rates everyone else is. You're breaking them of the mold that they need to climb the corporate ladder. 62% of Gen Z has indicated they've already started or intend to start their own business instead of working for somebody else their whole life. And of course, you're seeing this generation that's questioning everything. And so now is the best time possible to answer these questions about abortion in particular, because I think Gen Z realizes this isn't a partisan issue. It's not something that they need to firmly plant their feet on one side or the other based on how they vote and carry a sign outside every day. But in reality, it's something that they can intimately question for themselves and what that means in their own life, the lives of their friends and family and community, of course.
Well, that is amazing news and a great testimony to what we do at Students for Life and why we need to keep doing it. Because what you're saying, and I think is very true, especially with our experiences at Students for Life, is this is an incredible opportunity that we have right now. And what we've been kind of saying, post Roe's reversal, is that now is the opportunity we have to have a conversation about abortion. We're going to see, defeats in states or in federal legislation, and we have to arm ourselves and prepare ourselves for that, because this is going to be the first time in 50 years that our country actually has a real, honest to goodness discussion about abortion. And but that's such an incredible thought of, but this is something that's winnable, right? This is because they're so ill-informed or misinformed, we can really see a lot of cultural change. I saw there was a really great article. It's my favorite article ever written about students. It was kind of like a hit piece. It was called, it was in the New York Times, it was op-ed. It was lessons from the terrible triumph of the anti-abortion movement. And it was all about this documentary crew that followed Students for Life around for about a year and a half, and two other pro-life leaders. And we let Cynthia come to some of our trainings of how to save babies online, how to change minds online. And she came with us to some campus events, our national summit, at the Pro-Life March in DC. And, she is going around and they're all interviewing her because she's, a confirmed liberal. So they're like, Cynthia, you were embedded in the pro-life movement. Tell us how they're winning. And these interviews she's giving are just, this pro-abortion producer of this documentary, are amazing, because her takeaway is that she didn't really believe us that this movement of the pro-life gem was led by young women, that she was overwhelmed how many young women there were, and that we had the audacity one of the lines was, Hawkins relishes in the opportunity to talk to people who disagree with her. That's a win for us, that we get to talk to people who hate us or hate our opinion. And this article in the New York Times, I don't think Planned Parenthood would listen to it, because it would go against their whole woke cancel culture theme they've got going on. But that was the takeaway of this article of, maybe we should do what they've done and be willing to have conversations with people who disagree with us. It didn't need to take a whole article, because that's what you're supposed to do in culture change, is have conversations and change minds. It was just, I giggled through the entire article, because I was like, yeah, that's, you got it. You hit the nail on the head. You got our secret sauce at Students for Life. We go and have conversations with people who disagree with us.
Shocker at the end of the day. Am I right? But they
Yeah.
really do paint pro-lifers to be these evil, old, white, crotchety men that want nothing to do with having a genuine conversation with you. And obviously, we know from Students for Life and everyone else in the pro-life movement, that's not the truth. That's not even close to reality. But when I'm having these conversations with Gen Z in particular, they come so defensive and armed, and they are ready to go into battle to try to defend the fact that they support the abortion industry. And when you immediately respond with compassion, with patience, with respect for where they're coming from, understanding that they maybe never have been exposed to your opinion or your way of thinking, almost immediately, I consistently see young people in particular soften themselves. They get really quiet, they're willing to listen, they're able to have a back and forth conversation. And the truth is, you may not be able to change someone's mind on this issue immediately in one DM conversation or in one coffee date or whatever. But over time, you develop a sense of relationship with these people. And what I'm noticing is the pro-abortion community is starting to look at the pro-life community and say, those people are really happy. They're really solidified in what they believe. They are not backing down no matter how many questions I'm asking them. That makes me at least want to pause for a second and reflect and realize, why are they like that? They can't possibly believe a lie that substantially as an entire community of millions of people in this country. They can't possibly be that peaceful with such a horrible point of view to be taking when I feel so turbulent inside for supporting abortion. Maybe that should give me enough reason to pause and think about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you would hope that, especially you have this generation of angry millennial women, to start seeing, well, maybe there's something wrong I'm doing with my life. And I think that makes them more enraged when we're joyful and smiling in front of the Supreme Court instead of cursing and yelling and at everybody who walks around. So what are some of the arguments that you are seeing, resonate with young women, particularly Gen Zers right now?
I think the really interesting narrative that's being pushed more than anything else for this generation is that they're feeding you misinformation over and over and over again. And that trend will change every couple of weeks or every couple of months. It's not always the same talking point that we're seeing from the abortion industry, but they are just straight up lying to Generation Z over and over and over again. For a few weeks, it'll be, hey, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life because you can't get treatment for that. And then the next week, when that's all been debunked and everybody who has access to the internet is like, hang on a second, I did that research, that's not true. Then they go, oh, okay, so we messed up about that. But actually, if you're a woman who lives in a state like Texas or Oklahoma and you go to a state like Colorado, you're going to get prosecuted for that and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And then everybody Googles it and looks on TikTok and looks on Instagram and says, okay, come on, that's not actually real. And so they're transitioning almost at the speed of light every couple of weeks, able to go immediately to a new narrative that is completely based on false information, obviously is not true. But interestingly, it's not about the clump of cells versus a baby argument, or what is a baby and what's alive and what's not alive argument that we saw with millennials. It is darn near impossible to try to convince this generation who grew up taking biology and human sciences and anatomy and all of the classes that we took even in high school before we even got to college, let alone the classes I took in college as a pre-med student. It is impossible to convince them that that is not a baby. I think that's just obvious to everyone at this point. And so the abortion industry isn't trying to lean into that. They're saying, okay, we've acknowledged that this is a baby. Now let's argue why we need to kill that baby. And they're really open about it. So it's fascinating because with millennials, it really was this, it's not a baby, it's just a clump of cells, it's just tissue. Don't worry, because they didn't want to upset people that way. But I think Gen Z has been exposed to so much societal trauma in our entire life that they're not hiding the fact that it's death anymore. We've been exposed to death infinity times throughout our childhood and young adult years. Now they're trying to justify why that death is better than life, which is crazy.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on there because, having this conversation, it's so hard because in our pro-life apologetics and the way we were trained, and I still think this holds weight of, get everything back down to the baby. At the end of the day, what is it? What is an abortion? What does it result in? The death of a unique whole living human being. But I do see that changing in many regards because, they're not they're not arguing that point or saying that's disinformation, that it's a baby. The argument is that baby isn't valuable. It's not worthy of life like I am, or it may have some worth and dignity, but it's less worthy. And I think that's a much harder conversation to have with somebody of why choosing abortion is an act of selfishness, where you're saying someone's inconvenience says that they are not worthy of life. And I think that's a harder question to get into with especially on DMs with somebody.
Yeah. And I'm even seeing on social media just heart-wrenching posts and videos of women who are saying, I wish I was aborted. So obviously I'm going to abort my child. And they don't have worth of their own life from a self-image perspective, which is very ironic because this is supposed to be the self-love, get in touch with your emotions and be unafraid to admit that you're depressed or anxious generation. And yet we continue to see anxiety and depression and suicide and substance abuse and a whole host of other mental ailments and illnesses continue to raise exponentially in this generation. So it's almost like what we're doing is not working.
That's a great point. I think I'm taking notes actually while you type, because I feel like there's an op-ed in what you just said. And something that really needs to be shared, I think, broader with the entire pro-life movement, where you have a whole generation of people who have grown up with school shootings, who've seen death around them, who have contemplated their own death and what they would do if there was an active shooter in their school, for example, who are the most depressed, anxious, have the highest substance abuse rates. Trying to show them why a fetus, a human being in that early stage inside of woman that they've never met before is valuable of life is going to be a really hard argument when they themselves don't value their own lives. And I think maybe that's where we're going to have to start of why their life is valuable. I think this speaks into what you're doing is like that TikTok, Instagram big sister is extremely important. It's kind of a mushy, I guess, thing to get into for like general conservative commentators, but this is a policy issue, right? Of valuing human life. That's why we promote good public policy, is because we value human life and we want to see human life flourish in our country. Okay, one more question, and I'll let you go. I know it's early there. This generation, especially the women in this generation, are bold, and they have to be bold, especially when they're engaging on campuses or in the public. We've seen our student leaders, verbally attacked, physically assaulted, sadly, for going against this leftist narrative on abortion. You were extremely bold when you were in school. And you wrote about it in your book, Frontlines, which is an amazing book. I encourage any pro-life student, Gen Zer, to get a hold of it. I think it'll give you the kind of the courage that you need learning from Isabel's story. But what is your advice to young people, especially now, who are just returning, back to school, kind of just the second year back post-COVID, so things, this year might be better than they were last year, who are going to have to make some decisions of whether to kind of scoot by without being noticed, or are going to have to make that decision to take a vocal stand to what's really important to them. What's your kind of advice to them?
This is maybe the most common question that I am asked day in and day out in DMs and live streams that I'm doing on Getter and emails and everything. So it's fascinating that this becomes the most common question, because I think so many people are very deeply rooted in their beliefs in this generation, but they have absolutely no idea where to start in sharing those things publicly. And they see what happens to vocal and outspoken students on campus. They see those physical assaults happening on campus. They see their friend's address get doxxed. They see everybody get bullied on social media, and they think, I don't want to have to go through that. But I think the really sad reality, and I always like to be honest with this generation, is that you either have to keep your head down and never share your beliefs publicly, or you are going to have to expose yourself to some of that backlash and hatred. And that doesn't mean all of those things are going to happen to you, but it does mean that some of those things are going to happen to you. You are going to lose friends.
Yeah.
You may lose the respect of your professors and your teachers. You may get fired from your job. You may even get kicked out of school if you really want to stay as convicted as you can in your beliefs. I've seen it happen so many times to other Gen Zers, and yet it doesn't shake us. And I think the main reason for that is that before I am a conservative, I am a Christian first and foremost. And what's fascinating is we've fed this bill of goods to Gen Z that when you stand by your beliefs and you're really convicted in the things that you believe in and you refuse to be moved by the mob, everything's going to feel good all the time. You're going to be the hero. It's going to be fantastic. And the reality is it is not going to feel good all the time. You are going to feel isolated. You are going to feel backlash. As Christians, we believe that if we tell the truth to a world that's rejecting the very concept of truth, we are going to be hated. And that word hated is used over and over and over again in the gospel as a consequence for telling the truth to a world. And obviously, as Christians, we believe that the truth is Jesus Christ. It's a human being. But it's really interesting that we've sort of skirted around that reality to try to make young people realize they're going to feel good all the time when we know that that's not true. So I always like to wear that as a badge of honor. You know, I get more horrifying DMs and emails and text messages from people than you could ever wrap your head around. My parents in particular will never, ever open my social media apps when I'm around because they can't handle reading.
I know my husband, he was watching a video of one of my former podcast videos, and I was like, what are you watching? And he was like, I'm just reading the comments. I'm like, get off, just don't even, because it, you know,
you can't look.
I know I did a TV hit recently and he was like, I can't watch it because I can't read your comments. I can't do it.
It's so true. And so when you get all of those DMs, I've been there. I've had my address to my 1-bedroom apartment in my college town doxed online because people were upset that I was a pro-life conservative Christian girl on campus. I've had death threats and rape threats from people that I sat next to in class and was in student government with. I mean, the whole nine, you name it, I have been there. And yet I continue to feel more excited and more convicted and more passionate every single time I get one of those messages, even if it's coming from people within your own circle that you expect to always be on your side, because that is quite literally a sign that you are marching away from what the world is telling you should embrace and towards everything to make this world a little bit more like the next one. So I always encourage this next generation to keep your head down, keep working hard. Don't read the comment section and the DMs all the time. It's not worth it. But be unafraid to embrace some of that criticism and backlash, because it's really a sign that you're doing all the right things.
Right. I mean, I think what you're displaying is an activist mindset. I have an activist mindset. And I would encourage you to have it. I don't know what the other mindset would be, the comparison, but there's definitely an activist mindset. And then there's academic mindset. And folks, you know, who don't display the activist mindset are the ones I hear who get increasingly frustrated or upset or internalize the comments that are being directed at them on social media for just, you know, simply having the audacity to speak up to the fact that they're pro-life. And I think that is extremely important, to have that activist mindset. You know, find the activist in your life that inspires you, and like say, like, would Isabel Brown be upset by this comment? No, Isabel would be excited about it. And it's the same way. I love when I get protesters at an event on campus. I get angry if I go to a campus and there's not protests. That's the one thing I tell students when they invite me to campus. Can you get me protesters? Because that will tell me whether or not we've entered into the actual dialogue on that campus to have a real conversation. Change only happens at the point of conflict. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And once again, who cares what random person says about you on social media? You don't get your self-worth and your value from how other people perceive you or what they say about you. And I think that's important to keep in mind. Well, thanks, Isabel, for coming on. I actually have an op-ed almost written now from this podcast, because I think you've given me a lot, certainly, to think about. Someone who's talking to Gen Z, and I'm a parent. I realized when you said 12 to 25, I'm a parent of a Gen Zer. So that would explain some things going on in my home life with my one teenager. What's the generation after this that I have to be prepared for?
Generation Alpha is the children of millennials, and they need our help. So please pray for them.
Those are my children. Gunner, I guess, is Gen Z, but then the rest of my children would be Generation Alpha. Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about ill-informed, misguided, the blue-haired lady yelling at the sky in the construction vest. reproduced and had a child. And can you imagine?
So get excited, America, because the fight is not over.
Well, let's hope that this holds true, though, that alpha rebels against, their parents, the millennial parents. So I think that's okay. Something to pray about, everyone, is Gen Alpha. Thanks, Isabel, for all you're doing. Thanks to the courage you have in withstanding all of the negative comments and hateful things on social media in the quest to be the Generation Z, the post-road generation's big sister. I'm cheering you on, and I hope a lot of folks who listen in today start to follow you at the Isabel Brown on Instagram, Getter, TikTok, and all of the things, and especially in your new show, Rent Free, which I think is hilarious. Because I try to live rent-free in the abortion industry's head every single day, and that's my goal. So
we love to see it, Kristan. Thank you so much for having me back.
All right, thanks, Isabel. And thank you all for tuning in today to this really fun episode of Explicitly Pro-Life Podcast. It was extremely informative for me, as you might have heard me even clacking at my keyboard, taking some notes, because there was so much good information that Isabel was giving us as pro-life advocates across the country for how to have effective conversations with young people and how to start that conversation. The main point of today was just keep having conversations and be willing to take the time to have conversations, because you will be planting that seed of truth in someone's mind. Thanks, guys. Thank you.